All right. Okay, so last time in the previous chapters, we looked at the ratio analysis of the balance sheet. Okay, so this time we're looking at the income statement. Now remember, one of the big things that you really ought to be looking over when you're looking at all of these ratios is make sure when you've got the formulas, make sure you understand where you have to pull that number from, okay? And practice that, because that's going to be one of those things that if you're constantly struggling with where you're going to have to pull those numbers from, then you're going to be wasting time that you could actually be doing something productive on the exam. So some ratios are all balance sheet, some ratios are all income statement, and some are both, okay? Certainly.
All right, folks. I see you guys.
All right. Okay. So when we are looking, all right. So when we're looking at ratios, again, I'm constantly repeating myself, because when I'm constantly repeating, just realize that means it's something important. Yes.
So he's still continuing with the homework, right? Yeah. All reading and stuff like that.
That's what I will know for sure after class. Yeah.
It is today.
I spoke with him, and then I also spoke with, boy, so you missed the part.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, she told you about it.
I was in the library.
All right? Okay. So, when we're looking at ratios, okay, they're easy to compute and use, but again, you have to be able to not only calculate them, but you need to be able to use them, interpret them, okay? Next, they give us a basis for comparison. So now, it doesn't matter what the total dollar amount is, say for something like cost of goods sold. So maybe cost of goods sold last year was $1 million, and cost of goods sold this year was $1.5 million. Now, if you do dollar to dollar, that would look like, uh-oh, not good. But if we actually have a 50% increase in sales, along with that 50% increase in cost, now we're still okay, right? So not just dollar to dollar comparison, but these ratios give us something else to take a look at so we can tell whether something's going wrong, okay? So it can point to problem areas. So again, things like if our cost of sales percentage-wise starts increasing, that would mean for every dollar in sales, now we're spending more on our cost of sales. We talked about that egg issue, was it last year, when all the eggs and everything had all the salmonella and the issues and everything else. So cost of sales would have gone up. But again, it's okay because it should be on some level. Some of that became a temporary price increase, and now it's sort of dropped back. But again, just like anything else, once the price goes up, it never really quite goes back to where it was before. So again, any dishes that we're making that have eggs involved, we now may actually need to go back and take a look at, do we need to actually increase the price that we're charging the customer, right? Okay. And then establishing trends. So again, year over year, what's happening? When costs are going up percentage-wise year over year, that's bad because we're spending more money per dollar of revenue on our costs, okay? Now, when revenues are going up, that's good, okay? All right, so limitations, okay? A standalone ratio doesn't tell us a whole lot of anything. We've got to compare it to something, right? So, you know, this is always the picture that I have in my mind, and this really has nothing to do with accounting. But my husband was traveling at one point, and I'm standing there in the house for about 2 or 3 days, and in the evenings I sit there and I'm like, man, it's getting a little warm in here. And because I didn't have somebody to ask, it's like, is it warm in here to you? I didn't realize the air conditioning had gone out, okay? So unless you have something to evaluate it against, whether it be budget, whether it be our competitors, whether it be industry standards, we can't really say, does this ratio look good or not, okay? They don't solve problems, okay? They just sort of point us to what could be causing an issue. So it's things like, let's say that cost of sales started increasing percentage-wise. So we're spending more money on the actual food that we're serving to the customers, but then again, now we've got to hunt down why is it increasing. So again, going back to the egg issue that we had last year, what is that the issue? And then we have to determine, is that increase in cost a permanent issue or is it a temporary issue? Okay, because if it's a permanent issue, we're going to have to raise prices to the customer. Okay, there's just no way around it. Or we've just got to start redoing our menu and maybe take out some of the dishes that have eggs involved in them. Okay, all right, they have to be properly interpreted. So again, seeing that ratio and what the trend of it is going to tell us what's, that something's going on, but then we've got to, again, take a look at it in more depth to figure out what's going on actually, okay? Income statement estimates. So after the midterm, one of the chapters that you're going to look at is going to be a whole chapter on fixed asset purchases and depreciation methods. And there's more than one depreciation method, okay? So when you're talking about depreciation, you've got that accumulated depreciation, so that's bringing down your net assets, and then you've got the depreciation expense, which is bringing down net income. So depending on which method you choose, some depreciation methods take a whole bunch of depreciation early on and then very quickly fade off. Others, it's kind of the same amount each year, and then others, it can kind of bounce around depending on what your production is. Okay? So there are some estimates that are involved here. So if we're choosing to do depreciation method where we take a whole lot of depreciation first in the very early years and then it really fades off pretty quickly, that's going to have a pretty significant impact on our ratios versus another company that chooses a straight line depreciation method, which we did last semester, okay? And then changes in accounting procedures as well. So if we change how we do something or how we record something in the accounting department, that can also change our ratios, okay, from one year to the next. And we have to make sure that we're keeping that in mind, because we could make a procedure change which would then affect our accounting records, which then may make our ratios look better and or worse. And now we're sitting there going, hey, we're doing better, and then it's like, well, that's only because the accounting procedure changed, right? Okay, didn't have anything to do with how we were actually performing. All right, again, this is a review here. So when you're doing your comparisons, again, remember, go vertical first, calculate your ratios, and then the first thing that you determine is how did we do compared to current year's budget, okay? Then we go horizontal. So then we compare this year to last year and maybe even 2 years ago. So then we try to establish internal trends on how this ratio is doing. Then we go outside or external comparisons. So now we compare to our industry competitors or the industry standard ratios, okay? So stay internal, okay, first, determine budget, comparison to budget, then go stay internal and go year-over-year comparison, then go external to industry competitors and industry standards, okay? So when you're doing your analysis on your midterm, make sure you go in It doesn't have to be in that order, but just make sure you cover all your bases. Internal compared to budget current year, internal year-over-year analysis, then external industry and trade associations or industry standards. Okay? All right, so the first ratio that we have in this chapter is profit margin ratio. All right, profit margin ratio. Keep in mind, again, these slides are all summarized. This guy loves to take one calculation of a ratio, apply it in different ways, and essentially present it as if it were a different ratio. So I think this one is in the chapter 4 different times, as if it's 4 different ratios. It's one ratio applied 4 different ways. Okay, so watch what's happening here. We've got a profit margin ratio. The first way that we can look at a profit margin ratio is we can look at it based on the department. Okay, so if we've got our internal income statement, okay, we're going to take our income or loss from that department and divide it by the net revenue. So that's going to give us a percentage of how much do we get to, are we actually showing in profits compared to the net revenues, okay? So in this particular case, higher is going to be better, all right? But what he does, the author does, in this chapter is he'll take, like, the profit margin ratio for rooms. So you take the 692, 261, divided by the 890.75, he calls that one ratio. Then he goes to a different department like food and beverage, and he takes the 87, 377, divides it by the 524, 570, and calls it a different ratio. Okay? It's the same ratio. Okay? One ratio applied possibly 5 different ways because we've got 5 different departments. Okay? All good there? Okay? Now, so when we're looking at departmental ratios, it's simply the income or loss divided by the net revenue. But when we look at it on a corporate basis, now we've got to use a little more of that income statement than we did before. So now we're going to take our net revenues up here for our total operating departments, and we're going to divide that into the net income from the very bottom of the income statement. Okay? So this is the number from that income statement all the way at the bottom. Okay? So again, same ratio, profit margin ratio, applied 6 different ways. Okay? But there's really no change. And again, higher is always better on a profit margin ratio. All right? Then we've got our average room rate or our average daily rate. Okay, now again, this only applies to the rooms department, right? Because food and beverage, we don't have rooms, right? So we simply take our total net room revenue, okay, and divide that by total paid room nights occupied. Now, I change up the verbiage just a little bit on this denominator only because I'm trying to create a picture in your head to understand what you're actually using here. So when you've got paid room nights occupied, that basically means, let's say that, picture that we have, let's even picture it like a bed and breakfast, okay? We've got 5 rooms. We've got 1 month that's got 30 days in it, okay? If we take one room by itself, if that room was rented out, let's say 20 days during the month, okay, then 20 days are going to be the room nights occupied for that one room. So if we have 5 rooms that were occupied 20 days during the month, how many paid room nights are we going to have? 100 paid room nights, okay? So again, it's paid room nights occupied. Okay, so how many days did we rent out that room? Yes?
How is it normally worded in the just so like when I'm like looking through it, like I know if I can.
Let's see, yeah. Okay, all right, so if you look at page 227, okay, you've got your average room rate, and notice it says paid rooms occupied, okay? So what I add here is basically nights, okay? Because the thing is when students are thinking about this ratio, it's like if I told you that I had 5 rooms, okay, in my bed and breakfast, in this particular ratio, students always want to take this and they want to take 5, divide, our divisor would be 5, okay? The issue is though, we're looking for room nights. So if we've got 5 rooms and they were occupied 20 nights each, we've got 100 room nights that are occupied, okay? So it's not, make sure you understand this, the denominator in this one is not the number of physical room spaces, it is the number of room nights that room was actually rented out, okay? Yeah, you would take the 20 rooms, so if each room, we had 5 rooms, each room was rented out 20 nights during the month, we would take 5 physical rooms times 20 nights each, and we would get 100 room nights for this ratio, okay? Now, then we're going to take that number and we're going to divide that into total net room revenues. Now, understand what this is doing. What this ratio is actually getting you to evaluate is how much did we actually charge per room night, okay? So on average, when people came in and rented out a room, on average, how much did they pay per night that the rooms were actually rented out, okay? So if we're looking at, you ever been to a hotel, and if you ever notice this, every hotel, when you go in, there's always a little board on the back of the door that tells you what the typical room rate is for that room. And it's always something ridiculously higher than you probably paid for the room anyway. So if you pay $50 a night, a lot of times it's somewhere around like 100 or 125. It's weird. But if 100 or 125 was what we were actually shooting for on the average rental room night, and we came in at 75, obviously we haven't been able to meet what we budgeted. Does that make sense? So if we're shooting for $125 for every night that's rented out, and we only hit 75, we're way under budget. So in this particular case, we've got to, what this will tell us is, did we meet budget on what we thought we were going to rent out per night, or how much we were going to charge per night? And then we've got to decide, what is the reason why we came in so low? So if we were shooting for 125 and we only hit 75, is our marketing campaign not working well enough? And do we need to take a step back and say, all right, if we do a little bit more marketing, get the demand up, then we can maybe charge more, okay? That sort of thing. Or do we need to, are the customers not happy with the value that they're getting, okay? So something like, I don't know about you, but I never necessarily worried about the dollar amount that I'm spending. Is just what am I getting for it? Okay, it's always a value proposition. So if you pay $200 a night for a hotel room, you kind of have an idea in your head that it's like, okay, I'm going to walk in there and there better be some nice linens on the bed, and there better be some nice things in the bathroom, and there better be some nice furniture and that sort of thing. So maybe the customers aren't happy with what they're getting for their value. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at for average room rate. Okay, all right. Now, then we've got RevPAR. So we're looking at revenue per available room, okay? So again, go back to total room nights available. Now, again, think, if we've got a bed and breakfast that has 5 rooms and we've got 30 nights that we can rent out each room, what are our total room nights available? 150, right? Okay? So, would you expect this ratio to come in lower or higher than our average room rate? Okay, here's average room rate. It's total net room revenues divided by total paid room nights. This is total net room revenues divided by total room nights available.
So this one would be lower, assuming that you didn't rent out all your rooms.
Good. Assuming that you didn't run out all of your rooms and you're not at 100% occupancy, yeah, this is always going to be lower. Okay? So what we're trying to determine at this point is how much total revenue are we bringing in per room available. So this RevPAR is always going to be lower than our average room rate. Because our divisor on average room rate is room nights occupied. This one is room nights available. Okay? Again, this is another one of those where I add nights. When you see it in the book, it's total rooms available. Again, not physical rooms, nights that are available. Okay?
You said all is gonna be lower than what?
It's this ratio is always going to be lower than the one that we just looked at, your average room rate. Okay? Because we're using the same numerator, okay? Total room revenues, okay? But now this one, rooms occupied, is going to be a lower number than rooms available. Okay? All right. Now, if you want to equate this, we'll look at this when we get to food and beverage area, but this is basically, this ratio is basically how much revenue are we bringing in per seat in the dining room. Okay? All right? All right, then we've got occupancy percentages. Again, room department only, okay? So now we're going to take the comparison of the rooms available to the room nights occupied. So what this is going to give us is an average percentage of rooms rented out. So if we go back to our example, 5 rooms, we got a 30-night month. All the rooms were rented out 20 nights during the month. Okay, our percentage of room nights occupied is going to be 100 room nights occupied divided by 150 room nights available. So percentage is going to be 66%, 2/3. Okay, so again, get the comparison. If you take the last 3 ratios that we're looking at, this is the ratio that ties those previous 2 together. Okay, so the higher our percentage of room nights occupied, okay, the higher our RevPAR is going to get. Okay? The lower our percentage of occupancy, the lower our RevPAR is going to go. Okay? So take those 3 ratios, right? Here we got room nights occupied, same net room revenue. Now we've got same net room revenue divided by total nights available. Now we've got total nights occupied versus available. So again, when you're looking at this and you're doing your studying, compare these 3 ratios together, okay? And start playing with some numbers and stuff, and see how they move together. Okay. Very good. All right. All right, now we're switching over to food and beverage, okay? Now, again, realize that he presents this as multiple ratios in the chapter. I put it in as one ratio. We're just going to apply it in different ways, okay? So we can do, take this one, take the beverage out first. We can do total net food, okay, revenues divided by the number of food guests served, okay? Or we could take beverage revenues and divide that by number of beverage guests served, okay? Or we can combine them together and then get a total food and beverage, okay? So if we're talking about food, we're talking, picture a restaurant with a restaurant area and a totally separate bar. So now we're talking about everybody in the restaurant that only ordered food, okay? So we're looking at their total food revenues and we're figuring out how many people we actually served there. So again, average check per paying guest. So again, this is one of those, if we were shooting for, well, hang on a second, before I say that, let me back up 1 second. Let's imagine that our restaurant serves both all breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So if we're looking at net food revenues per paying guest during breakfast, okay, depending on how nice our restaurant is, breakfast might run somewhere between $5 and $7-ish per guest. But then when we go to the lunch service, now lunch service probably going to be somewhere between $7 and $10 per guest. Then if we're looking at dinner's probably going to be upwards of somewhere between $15 to $20 per guest, right? So again, when you apply this ratio, depending on which food service you're looking at, we can come up with a very different average check per paying guest during a food service, because breakfast costs less than lunch, and lunch costs a little more than breakfast, and dinner costs more than both, okay? So again, one ratio applied different ways. Okay? Now we can also do this as, a total for the month and get a complete view of what we're looking at. We can apply it to maybe weekend service versus during the week service, depending on what our location is really focused on. Okay? You getting the idea here? You getting the picture? So we can do food only, food guests served. We can do beverage guests served, or we can do both. So maybe if you want to picture both, now we're talking about folks that came in, ordered dinner, and had a glass of wine, so we had to serve them from the bar as well. Okay. So average check per paying guest. So again, here, if we do it per service, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, we get a much more accurate view of what's going on here, rather than if we combine everything together, if we actually serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because again, we'll lose some of the nuances of the cost of those different services for each guest. Okay? All right. Now, hang on 1 second. Let me go back to this one. So if we're looking at, all right, we're looking at total food and or beverage revenue. Think, we're looking at this group right here, okay? So again, if we wanted to break up you can see on this income statement, we've got food and beverage combined together. If we needed to do this as beverage only or food only, we would have to break those two departments out, okay? The other thing is the number of covers, okay, or guest served. I would actually have to give you that number, okay? That's not something that you can really calculate. I would have to give you that, okay? All right. Then we've got our food and beverage cost percentage, okay? So now we're looking at cost of food and or beverage sold. So now we can look at cost of food divided by total net food revenues. We could do beverages, cost of beverage sold divided by beverage revenues, or we could do both, okay? So in this particular case, when we move over here to this income statement, on this income statement, we've got food and beverage combined together. So we would have food or beverage sold, okay, which would be the 178,310, okay, divided by the total revenues, which would be the 524,570. Okay, so these two numbers right here. Okay. Now, the reason why we evaluate this ratio here is this is the one thing, the one cost that we have to be able to serve guests, right? If cost of food or beverage goes away, we've got nothing to sell, okay? So what we're trying to figure out here is absolute minimum. What is the average amount that we are spending per dollar of revenues for those services, okay? Because again, I think you guys took a budgeting class for culinary where food runs somewhere, give or take, around 30%, but the beverage runs much lower than that, simply because it's definitely lasts longer and you pay less for it per drink, because there's a whole lot more labor that goes into one drink, putting one beverage together rather than the food, okay? So this is the ratio that tells you, all right, we're spending 30 cents for every dollar in revenue, or we're spending 15 cents of every dollar in beverage sales, or we're spending 28 cents in total. Okay? So this is what's telling us this is what we've got to hate having to switch that back and forth. I'll tell you what. Let me leave it there. That's going to switch me all around. I want to go back and forth to those two other slides. All right. The next one, we've got our labor cost percentage. So now again, think, the last ratio was evaluating how much the actual cost of the food or the beverage was. So what's the invoice amount for the purchases from the distributor for the alcohol and the distributors for the food, okay? Now we're trying to determine what is the cost of our labor that's going into preparation for that food and beverage, okay? So here, again, we're going to we can do departmental or corporate, okay? So we'll start with departmental. We take total departmental payroll and related expenses, and we divide that by total departmental net revenues, okay? Our departmental payroll and related expenses is going to come from this group right here, okay? And our net revenues for that department are going to come from over here, okay? If we want to do this on a corporate level, we would take total payroll and related expenses divided by our total revenues, Okay? Again, this is another one of those where in the book, it's one ratio applied multiple different ways. So we could take any of the payroll and related expenses divided by net revenues to get this labor cost percentage for any department. We could also take totals for corporate. Okay. And again, we're looking at average cost of payroll for each dollar of departmental revenues or corporate revenues. Okay. So again, it's telling us for every dollar in revenue, what amount are we spending on payroll? So for every dollar that we're spending in, that we're pulling in revenues, are we spending 30 cents on payroll or are we spending 50 cents on payroll? Okay. We're trying to figure out what the basic costs are, food and labor, to get it to the customer to earn that $1 in revenues. Okay? Now, again, these last three slides are all related, and this prime cost percentage is what pulls it all together. Okay? Because this prime cost percentage is now going to add total cost of sales to payroll and related expenses. So now, instead of taking total cost divided by net revenues by itself, or payroll divided by net revenues by itself, we're taking both cost of sales and payroll and dividing it into net revenues. So again, this gives us the percentage of, for every dollar that we're earning in revenues, how much do we absolutely have to spend to earn that dollar? Is it 50 cents? Is it 60 cents? Okay? Which then tells us if it's 50 cents, that means we've got 50 cents per dollar to spend in other areas, undistributed expenses and down. If it's 60 cents that we're spending in prime cost percentage, that leaves us 40 cents to spend on undistributed, etc. Okay? So the cost of sales and the payroll, that's absolute. Can't get around those. All right. The inventory turnover ratio, we looked at this one in the other chapter. Okay. This is the exact same ratio that we looked at before. So now we're talking about cost of food or beverage sold. So that's going to come from the income statement. And then we're going to do average food or average beverage inventory. Now remember, average food or beverage inventory is beginning inventory plus ending inventory, bless you, divided by 2. Okay? That has to come from the balance sheet. So, all right. So here's our inventory. Now, this particular balance sheet only has the year-end numbers. We would have to have last year and this year. Okay. So last year, so think, when we're looking at average food or beverage inventory, we're going to have to find the appropriate inventory account. Okay. We're doing only food, we would have to find the food inventory account. We're doing only beverage, we would have to find the beverage inventory account. We're doing both, we would simply add them together, right? So again, in the book, he presents this like several different ratios. It's really not. One ratio applied different ways. All right? So on the balance sheet, you'll have to have last year's numbers and this year's numbers. Don't let that throw you off. Beginning inventory for this year is simply ending inventory for last year. Okay? That always seems to throw folks off. So in this one, higher is better. Okay? So remember, inventory turnover ratio, the more times we turn it, the more times we're actually selling it to the customer. Okay? All right, then, so you know it's coming up. So now we've got days inventory on hand ratio. Now again, don't let this, don't lose the picture of what's actually happening in the ratio. When we're doing this inventory turnover ratio and the days on hand ratio, we're trying to evaluate how long has it been since the truck backed up to the dock and unloaded everything to the point where the customer actually left with it through the door. Okay? That's the time period that we're evaluating with this previous two ratio. Okay? All right. I just realized one thing that we didn't do that I skipped over a little bit. Tell you what, let's go ahead and take our break. Let's do. Let's be back in here at what? 10. How about 10:38?